The Pentagon is blocking the White House from sharing the evidence they have with the International Criminal Court. This information was gathered by American intelligence agencies about what was going on in Ukraine. American military leaders oppose helping investigate Russians because they fear setting a precedent that may pave the way for Americans to be prosecuted. The rest of the administration, including intelligence agencies and the state and justice departments, favor giving the evidence to the court. The evidence is said to include details about an investigation stemming from Russia's invasion of Ukraine a year ago. The information includes material about Russian officials' decisions to deliberately target civilian infrastructure. The Department of Defense opposed and are now trying to undermine the letter and spirit of the law, Senator Lindsey Graham said. It seems to me that the Department of Defense is the problem child here, and the sooner we can get the information into the hands of the ICC, the better off the world will be. Representatives at the Pentagon, State Department, Justice Department, and the Director of National Intelligence declined to comment. Russian forces have been committing war crimes and crimes against humanity in Ukraine, and the Ukrainian people deserve justice. The International Criminal Court was created 2 decades ago as a standing venue to investigate war crimes, genocide, and crimes against humanity, under a 1998 treaty called the Rome Statute. In the past, the UN Security Council had established ad hoc tribunals to address atrocities in places like the former Yugoslavia and Rwanda. Many democracies joined the International Criminal Court, including close American allies like Britain, but the United States has long kept its distance, concerned that the tribunal could someday try to prosecute Americans. Administrations of both parties have taken the position that the court should not exercise jurisdiction over citizens from a country that hasn't signed the treaty, like the United States and Russia, even when the alleged war crimes take place in the territory of a country that did sign the treaty, like Ukraine and Afghanistan. President Bill Clinton signed the Rome Statute in 2000, but, calling it flawed, did not send it to the Senate for ratification. In 2002, President George W. Bush essentially withdrew that signature. Congress, for its part, established laws in 1999 and 2002 that limited what support the government could provide the court. Still, by the end of the Bush administration, the State Department declared that the United States accepted the reality of the court and acknowledged that it enjoys a large body of international support. The Obama administration took a step towards helping the court by offering rewards for the capture of fugitive warlords in Africa. In 2017, however, the top prosecutor for the court tried to investigate the torture of terrorism detainees during the Bush administration as part of a larger look at the Afghanistan war. In response, the Trump administration opposed sanctions on court personnel, and Secretary of State Mike Pompeo denounced it as corrupt. A thaw returned in 2021 when the Biden administration revoked those sanctions, and Mr. Khan, newly appointed as prosecutor, dropped the investigation. Then Russia invaded Ukraine last year, prompting a bipartisan push to hold President Vladimir V. Putin of Russia and others in his military chain of command to account, and setting off debates inside the administration and in Congress about whether and how to help the court. In late December, lawmakers enacted 2 laws aiming at holding Russia accountable for war crimes in Ukraine. One was a standalone bill, expanding the jurisdiction of American prosecutors to charge foreigners for war crimes committed abroad. The other was a provision about the International Criminal Court embedded in the large appropriations bill Congress passed late December. While the U.S. government remains prohibited from providing funding and other certain aid to the court, Congress created an exception that allows it to assist with investigations and prosecutions of foreign nationals related to the situation in Ukraine, including to support victims and witnesses. Despite that legal change and Congress's signal of support, the Pentagon has stood firm that the United States should not help the International Criminal Court investigate Russians for their actions in Ukraine, since Russia is not a party to the treaty that established the International Criminal Court. That resistance has attracted criticism both inside and outside the executive branch. Some legal specialists contend there's no benefit to that position. They argue that the United States would win more support over a hypothetical attempt to prosecute an American by using a narrower argument that, under the treaty, the court should only be used for countries that lack functioning investigative systems capable of addressing serious international crimes by their citizens, and the United States does not qualify. John Bellinger, a former top lawyer for the National Security Council and the State Department in the Bush administration, argued that if the court does not ever try to prosecute an American, we will have more allies who agree with the narrower argument than the broader argument. The Pentagon should reconsider the potential advantages of helping the court. I also think the Department of Defense needs to look at the ICC not purely in defensive terms, how it might screw us, but how we can use the ICC, the successor to the Nuremberg tribunals, as a tool to investigate and prosecute war criminals, Mr. Bellinger added. Senator Lindsey Graham said that the rest of the government had signed off on sharing the evidence and was frustrated by the Pentagon. Pentagon leaders, he said, have raised their concerns and they are not illegitimate, but I think on balance, what we did in the legislation is the way to go, and I want them to honor what we did. As an American, let me say this as clearly as I can. It's a good thing to prosecute American war criminals. There's a real double standard and hypocrisy that's a stain on our national honor and ethical integrity. By continuing to allow it, and by treating ourselves as inscrutable, allowing this conduct to continue with impunity, it weakens us as a nation, and it invites the authoritarians and terrorists of the world to excuse their actions. If we'd like to be leaders of the free world, and that's a big if these days, we need to be held accountable the same way we hold everyone else to account. The biggest surprise to me is that literally everyone else is on board. The intelligence community is cool with us sharing, as well as the State Department and the DOJ. It's just the Pentagon who are afraid of their soldiers and leaders that might be prosecuted for war crimes. The truth is, war criminals are war criminals, and they should be prosecuted regardless of nationality. Speaking of nationality, there seems to be a tendency, quote, the ICC has been accused of bias and of being a tool of Western imperialism, only punishing leaders from small, weak states, while ignoring crimes committed by richer and more powerful states. This sentiment has been expressed particularly by African leaders due to an alleged disproportionate focus on the court in Africa. Well, it claims to have a global mandate. Until January 16, all 9 situations involving the ICC had been investigating African countries. For example, in 2020, the Office of the Prosecutor decided not to investigate war crimes by UK forces in Iraq, despite its own findings that these crimes had been committed. This was followed by a decision in 2021 to deprioritize an investigation into war crimes in Afghanistan by US and Afghan national forces. Just 6 months later, the prosecutor launched his office's largest ever investigation, Ukraine.